All right, so we're back for our new project. So this time around, we're going to make a sci-fi room, and this room's going to have many different models in it. So we're not actually going to make one scene like we were with the crab. We're actually going to make a couple of different scenes, and then we can kind of import the different stuff into our master scene, right? Because we have the ability to file, and we can import whatever we need to in here, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to start off something pretty simple. Just kind of start making a table, and just kind of start to show you a tool I haven't really gone over yet that much, which is the bevel tool. It's really what I'm going to introduce you guys to today. So of course I'm going to go to modeling, right? So we go to the modeling menu. There we go. And once the modeling menu is up, and when you start a new scene, right? When you do go to open Blender for the first time, you just click on General, right? You don't open what you already have. You can just click on that General one. Kind of like when you go to File here, New, you'll see there's kind of General, right? And that just default loads in a cube for you. In this case, that's what we want because we're going to make our table from a cube. So that's fine. I'll make sure I'm in modeling here. In this case, we're not actually going to use our subdivision surface modifier, although we will take advantage of the mirror modifier to a certain extent. Not necessarily on this tabletop, but like on the legs and things like that. So in this case, what I want to do is I want to kind of adjust this guy a little, right? So I'm going to, go to 3 for face mode, right? So 3 for faces. And then, of course, remember, if you select on a face, in this case it was already all selected, but remember, if you select on a face, you can go to Select Menu, Select Linked. In this case, I've set it to a quick key already, spacebar, right? So that way when I hit spacebar, boom, it does that. So remember, you can set up your own quick keys for these, but Select Link has kind of that bracket, right? It's you'll see it's kind of one of the keys next to the Enter key. It's a bracket, but you can change those. Remember, you can actually change these to have better ones, right? The ones that maybe you like more, and stuff like that. So I changed mine to spacebar, but it does have a default. All right. So once we're there, of course, we can hit R for scale, right? And we've often, particularly working on our crab, we would use middle mouse button to do the uniform scale, right? So we kind of do that, right? But in this case, remember, you can also just grab on these specific handles, right? So remember, there's the squares, and that'll scale kind of 2 at a time. There's the single handles, right? The kind of long ones with the squares. And those will kind of scale down a specific axis, right? So you see how if you left click on those, you can kind of get yourself kind of a longer kind of table, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to start by making something simple like a table. Kind of get ourselves into that this week. Start to build some other stuff. We'll eventually build the room itself, right? An actual place to put stuff. But as a game design school, we want to build some levels, right? And basically, levels are just outdoor environments or rooms. And we need to start to get you guys to learn how to make furniture and things like that, because that's quite important to video games. All right, so remember, just the default cube is fine. That it gives you when you just click on General when you first open Blender up for a new scene. And then I just went to face mode, 3 for face mode, selected all the faces, which is easy. Either select all, Control A, right? In this case, because we want to select all. But there's also select linked, right? So remember, the select menu has a bunch of your selection tools and stuff like that. All right, so there we go. I've got that scaled down a bit more to kind of have the proper kind of size I want it to have, kind of lengthwise, right? Good little table here. Now, one of the things, though, that we saw with our other stuff that we were modeling, right, with our crab, was we used the subdivision surface modifier to give us that rounded, kind of more organic shape. And that's great for things like spaceships, cars, characters, creatures, right? But for when you're doing something that's a little more geometric, a little more boxy, like rooms, furniture, oftentimes you want to work just what we call straight low resolution, right? That means no subdivision surface, right? You don't have that modifier on it. It's just the exact geometry, the way you see it. So how do you get roundness on something that's supposed to be low res? Because one of the things about furniture, computers, desks, is if you actually look at them, they actually have rounded corners, right? They actually have rounded corners. If they didn't, you would cut yourself, right? So believe it or not, even when you think things don't have rounded corners, they do, right? So rounded corners are actually quite important to put on stuff if you can. For film, usually you can put it on pretty much everything. Film can handle that. video games, you have to be a little bit more cautious about overall polygon budget, right? So even though you would want to add bevels to every corner, sometimes you can't just because you don't have the budget to do it. You kind of put it on the larger corners. But generally, beveling corners is something you should always do unless there's a good reason not to. Like even for film, if it's a building way far in the background in a shot, you don't need to bevel it. Certain bevels are so small that they don't make a visual difference. Smartphones have some bevels like that. But most bevels are large enough to catch the light at least a little bit, and so you should try to put bevels in if you can. And if you you shouldn't put them in if there's a good reason not to. Like, we have to be more polygonally efficient. This is a game model. It's too far away. Things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys how to use the bevel tool, right? So the bevel tool is actually one of these tools right here, right? In fact, you'll see it's right there, and there's a quick key for it, Control B, right? Control B is the quick key for bevel. So you have it right here, and of course you'll find it very much in these, like edge mode has bevel, face mode. So remember, you have your menus up here that have pretty much most of the tools that you'll see here, or when you right-click, right? In this case, though, generally we want to bevel edges, right? We want to bevel edges. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit 2 for edge mode. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to specifically start off with just these kind of corner edges right here, right? So I'm just going to click, shift left click, right? That gives us all those edges around there. I'm just going to hit Q to kind of turn myself back to the normal selection tool. Remember, Q is your regular selection tool. It toggles you through all your selection types, though, including tweak tool. All right, so in this case, I just want to select all the corners. And there is the bevel tool right over here, right? Control B is the quick key for that, but it is right there, right? So if I click on that, the bevel tool is available. And like all these tools, you can grab on the handle, right? Or you can just middle mouse drag to kind of adjust it, right? So remember, you can always grab on the actual specific handle, right? And I don't want the bevel to be too big. I don't want the corners on this to be too rounded. So that'll be good there for the moment. Now you'll notice, like all tools, this little kind of, at the very bottom here, you'll see kind of the options, right? It's usually closed, but if you click on it, right, it opens it up, and you can actually see there's lots of options here. The next version of Blender, the 2.91 series, which should be out in sometime November, is actually going to have even more options in here. But Blender's got some pretty nice bevel tools. So you'll see in here that we can bevel, and really the width is just kind of the size. But you see what this bevel is really doing is it's taking that edge and it's splitting it into 2 other edges, and it's moving them at equidistance from each other at a 45-degree angle, right? And you can see that it basically kind of creates this corner for us, right? That's what the width controls, right? So if I was to kind of keep turning this down, you see how it gets a little smaller, a little bigger, right? If you try to go grab on this again, it'll do a second bevel, right? So you want to be careful with that, right? So when you kind of do that bevel, remember that first one out kind of does that, and then you want to adjust it actually from the options in here, right? So you want to go in here and actually adjust it there. Now, the other thing that's cool, and some of you guys will remember this from Maya last year, is right below width. So width is basically just the size of the bevel, right? How big it is. The smaller the number, the smaller the size of the bevel, the bigger it is. Segments. And you'll notice that if you click on this, you see how it adds kind of an extra edge there. And I can go up to 2. And you see how it's basically rounding this corner off, right? So I can actually add segments, and what it does is it properly rounds this corner, right? Now, one of the cool things that you could do with is there are different kind of ways it'll handle things, like you could do this by a percentage instead of by the offset, right? Offset's usually fine, though. One of the things you can do is there is something called shape, which is kind of your depth, right? It allows you to kind of push that in or around a little bit. 0.5 is usually a good default, but if you want the bevel to kind of curve inward, you can push that towards negative, right, or 0. So quite neat that you can actually kind of control this, right? So the big ones, for the most part, that you're going to need are width for the size of the bevel, segments gives it a couple of extra edges in there, and then shape can kind of allow you to push it in or out, stuff like that. There are a couple of other options here that we might need here and there, but usually those ones will kind of get you the major stuff that you like to have for that. So that's what your bevel tool does, though, is it just takes an edge, and it splits that edge into 2 edges, and it kind of moves them away from each other equally at a 45-degree angle. and if you add, and that's the width, and if you add segments, it gives you that proper rounded corner. Kind of neat, right? Kind of neat. In this case, we probably want to kind of take the top here a little bit. So of course I can go to 2 for edge mode, right, and just double click on an edge, and it'll select this edge loop there. So we just double click on it. There we go. And then of course we can do bevel, right? And middle mouse button will adjust it. And you see how it kind of can take this corner and add a bevel to it, right? Now, depending on how sci-fi angled you want to go, you might just leave it kind of lower res like that. You might go back into the bevel option here and add at least one more segment, right? But you'll see that that's starting to give us this kind of nice little kind of look to it, right? Now, you will notice this kind of has this faceted look to it, right? So one of the things you can actually do in object mode is, let me try to remember where it's at. There we go. So if you go back to object mode, right, 4 for object mode, and you go to the little green kind of triangle, right, because remember that can kind of, you can rename your UV maps, things like that. But just there's a section called normals, and what you can do is you can tell it to auto smooth, and you can give this an angle, right, like let's say 180, whoops, it's, 180, and that should, when you go to kind of do shade smooth, it should kind of smooth it and keep it kind of looking halfway decent, right? You can, of course, change this, right? If you want it to be more like, say, 85 degrees, right? You might do that as well. That'll get you pretty good. But this can kind of offer a little bit more direct control. So oftentimes when I'm working low res, I will go to the little green triangle, go to the normal section, check this on. And you see how it kind of just handles some of these things better with those angles. So just keep that in mind. Probably something below 90 degrees is good. But you will still have to kind of do a shade smooth on it, just to kind of make sure you've got shading. But that's kind of cool to know about, that there is this little bit of kind of auto smooth built in that can kind of protect or keep some of the shading flatter for these, where we want it to stay flatter, right? So kind of a little bit about that, right? But really, most of the bevel tool. I'm going to hit 3 again for face mode, so 3 for face mode. And I'm going to select this face. And I'm not going to bevel it, though, this time, because there's actually another tool that we want to use to kind of bring this in even amount, right? The scale tool won't necessarily always do that, right? Scale can, if I was to just go in here and say, do like an extrusion, Control E, and then, click, we could always scale it in. And in this case, see how it kind of doesn't handle it. And in this case, the extrude didn't quite work, but you'll see the scale, though, when we bring it in, you see how it kind of, it's fatter here and thinner here, right? So if you actually want to do a more uniform scale that looks kind of more normal, right, where everything is kind of the same width here, it's actually better to use a specific tool for that instead of scaling. So 3 for face mode, grab the face. Right-click, right? Remember, if you right-click, that brings up your context-sensitive menu. And in here, you'll see something called Inset Faces, right? And you click on it, and you just drag, and you'll notice it kind of extrudes. It creates new geometry, right? So there's new geometry created, but you'll notice that it actually kind of brings that in an even amount. So that's what your inset does, right? Is it's actually kind of doing an even kind of inset. But basically, that's an extrusion. It created new geometry. And then, of course, if I want to, I can right-click, extrude faces along normals to kind of push that down just a little bit. And you can kind of see we have a bit of kind of a table structure here now, right? So this is how you can start to kind of build your table. Now, of course, later this week we'll come in, we'll build some legs, explore the bevel tool more. But I figured this would be a great kind of good starting video to get you guys starting to play with today for building a table, right? That's really what we want to start to do, is build a table, we'll build some chairs, things like that. So at this point, I'm just going to go File, Save Scene. Just Save As is always a good one to start with. And then I can call this, room table. Let's call it sci-fi room. Sci-fi underscore room underscore table, right? It's good to label these things properly, right? It's for the sci-fi room project. It's the table. And of course, we could say 3D game art, right? Remember, using these kind of underscores and kind of having some kind of naming convention that's the same is always useful because it conveys the proper information. So we'll save as. And there we go. And that's a good start for that, I think. You know, not too heavy a video for our first video, but it gets you starting to play and thinking about the room stuff. And we get to talk about the bevel tool and how we can use the bevel tool and the inset tool to kind of create some cool little details pretty quickly and easily for our room stuff. And we're going to keep using a lot of this stuff. So we're going to see a lot more inset. We're going to see a lot more bevel, just like we saw a lot of extrude and loop cut. And we'll still actually see extrude loop cut as well. All right, so I think that'll be a great place to stop for this first video. All right.